Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, first and foremost, Happy New Year. We've had a little break over the holidays. Hope everyone had a good time, got to spend time with friends and family, those you care about. I know I did. I am grateful and thankful. And again, Happy New Year to one and all. Well, today we're going to talk about the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, who's passed away at the age 100. This week is full of remembrances, memorials, and reflections on the 39th President of the United States, as he will be laid to rest in his home, Plains, Georgia, later this week. I want to take this time to remember Jimmy Carter, though, the leader. Some good, some not so good, and some bad commentary has been offered about Jimmy Carter's leadership, politics, and our acute polarization of them are the foundations of these offerings. Surprisingly, but clearly, there have been moments of bipartisanship this week. This is good news. Being able to set aside, even for a moment, our politics of division is a sign of hope. I want to talk about leadership, though. That's what this podcast is all about. I want to talk about core values, and most importantly, how Jimmy Carter exemplified leadership by his fidelity to his core values. Leaders come from all walks of life. There's not just one recipe to be a leader. You don't have to come from humble beginnings to be a leader. Nor is a life of privilege a disqualifier to be a leader. No, leaders come from all kinds of places and all kinds of experiences. It is your commitment, the leader's commitment, to a set of core values, to help others, and to help those in need, and to help those you have been empowered to lead. Jimmy Carter was such a leader. He did come from humble beginnings. We'd likely consider an indoor toilet, running water, electricity as basic necessities in a home. Jimmy Carter did not have these until later in his life. This experience was formative for this leader. Jimmy Carter learned at a very young age that there was a group of people that surrounded him, his community. They were his life and were more important than the trappings of life, more important than the voices of those who believed status or position were more important. His friends and neighbors were largely black. His child rearing was by a black woman. Jimmy Carter loved and respected those in his life, his community. Jimmy Carter's leadership was truly about doing his very best to do the right thing. His core values were equality for all, equal justice under the law. Jimmy Carter believed in we, the people. He learned these core values at a very young age and exemplified them steadfastly throughout his life. Jimmy Carter went to the United States Naval Academy, graduating near the top of his class. His service selection following graduation was nuclear power and he attended nuclear power school and then ultimately served on a nuclear submarine. Being bright is a definite plus for a leader. Jimmy Carter was brilliant. Following his naval service, Jimmy Carter was a peanut farmer in Plains, Georgia, his home, a Georgia state senator, and the governor of Georgia. In his governor inaugural address, Jimmy Carter made clear that the days of white supremacy and disparagement of others must end. This core value, imbued in him from a very young age, would never change. Now, for a politician, that might not play well. In fact, as I said in the opening, it didn't. Politicians are largely transactional. You give me this, and I'll give you that. This was not Jimmy Carter. His core values were process-driven, not outcome-based. And I've spoken about this before, but that notion, being process-driven rather than outcome-based, is key and critical for a leader. He sought transformation, not transaction. An important marker for a leader, but possible trouble for a politician. Jimmy Carter did have setbacks from his fellow politicians. Many think his presidency was lackluster because he held to his core values. He strove to do the right thing. Following his presidency, he and his wife Rosalind opened the Carter Center near Atlanta. Not politics, but helping others. His efforts in public health, numerous. Monitoring elections, also numerous. And seeking peace, these were the cornerstones of the Carter Center mission and involvement in our world. Jimmy Carter was in fact awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work at seeking peace in our world. One pundit this week spoke of Jimmy Carter as being called to live the beatitudes. This is a Christian group of axioms following what many in the Christian faith know as the Sermon on the Mount. But let me just run through these quickly, because this is how now the late President Jimmy Carter is being described. He represents these beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Well, those 8 quotes are the Beatitudes in order. They, yes, do describe President Jimmy Carter. Well, this is a pretty extraordinary bar, these Beatitudes, for a leader. But Jimmy Carter truly led his life of the Beatitudes. I was struck by the involvement of the Naval Academy this week and would like to speak to it for a number of reasons. Certainly not that I in any way, shape, or form approximate Jimmy Carter, because I do not. But his training, his knowledge, and his experience speak to a code that we live by, the core values, what I call the leadership core competencies that were every bit of Jimmy Carter's life. As I mentioned, he excelled at the Naval Academy. He went on and excelled in nuclear power. He excelled in every spot along the way, but not without negative feedback, because he chose the path of leadership. So many people today are choosing a different path, that transactional path, that shortcut, that fealty to an oligarch or someone who would like to be or approximate being a dictator. Well, Jimmy Carter was the polar opposite. And that's why I think it's important today to focus on Jimmy Carter, the leader. He spent some time preparing his funeral plans, his wishes, his desires. And living to 100 years of age, he certainly had time to do that and do it in detail. So it is particularly interesting and curious about the involvement of the U.S. Naval Academy, again, where Jimmy Carter graduated. This is a school that's everything about leadership, about core values, about process over product, about doing the right thing, and to be held accountable if you do not. I find that curious, that the people that would come and sing the Glee Club, the people that would play the music, the drum and bugle corps, the people that would march in procession, the company that he was a part of at the Naval Academy would all be directly and integrally represented in the ceremony. That he would have his movement from Georgia to Washington, D.C., not directly to the Capitol, no, but to the Navy Memorial. Interesting. He was, in fact, the president that brought about the creation of the Navy Memorial in D.C. And this was so meaningful and powerful to me. As many of you know, I am also a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. Nothing like Jimmy Carter, but I am so proud and humbled to be a graduate of the Naval Academy. As my career in the Navy progressed, and I had the opportunity to lead, to command, I would be asked regularly and routinely by those I served, sailors, to re-enlist and to have me perform their re-enlistment. Regularly and routinely, they asked if we could do it at the Navy Memorial. At first, I was curious. I didn't know that much about it. I know it was there, but several of the chiefs in the units I commanded, and certainly the master chiefs, made it clear that this was a special place. And so, literally for years, once a month, we would hop in a van and I would go down with these sailors seeking to re-enlist, to continue their service to their country, to be re-enlisted at the Navy Memorial. So it really struck me as a place that I had spent literally an afternoon every month for years, re-enlisting people who had chosen to serve our country in uniform, just as Jimmy Carter did. And this place existed because Jimmy Carter brought it to reality. So there's really something there that I think is important. That core value, that sense of community, that love and feelings for your fellow sailors, those that are your community, those that are your brothers and sisters. So I think that that's special for me to think about the role that the Navy Memorial played. As time went on, regularly and routinely, Jimmy Carter would hearken back to experiences, to people from the Navy. I found that particularly interesting, particularly now as I get older and do the same. I am recalled about those that I consider family to this day, shipmates to this day, people that I served with, people that I had the absolute pleasure to lead. So Jimmy Carter did this later in his life too. And I reflect upon that and say, isn't that curious that such a place would create such values that you would just, again, hold steadfastly throughout your life. So I think that that's really quite curious and noteworthy for a leader, because I truly believe, let me just preface this with, there are many, many, many great schools, but I really believe that the U.S. Naval Academy is the finest undergraduate school in the world. It is an absolute outstanding academic institution, to be sure. But it does so much more beyond the academics. The head is important, but the heart, the gut, the soul, and the development of those through training, through knowledge and experience is what made Jimmy Carter everything he is and was. Forming from a very, very young age in planes to the Naval Academy, to the nuclear submarine, to ultimately President of the United States. He had the core values. As the pundit said, he lived the life of the beatitudes. Well, I believe that. But I think that his understanding of serving others, not self, but others, was this driving, commanding force inside him, again from a very young age. You've heard me use this term non-sibi, not for self. President Jimmy Carter lived that life, not for self. He didn't do it without problems or without judgment of others, particularly politicians. But he would stay steadfast to his core values. I think, folks, this is an absolutely huge point to take away. If we live our self with core values, with leadership core competencies, and are steadfast about staying with them, there may be those we disappoint, those that get upset, those that would denigrate or disparage us. But seeking to do the right thing was what Jimmy Carter was about. It's what I think the Naval Academy taught him and every one of us that has been fortunate to attend that great institution. And I think today we remember this Naval Academy graduate, this 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. All right, everyone. My remembrance of a great man and a great leader who will be laid to rest in Plains later this week. Take a moment. Think about President Carter. Think about your leadership journey and all that it can be. All right. Thanks. Take care. We will talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.